From this video onwards, we will start a series of videos where we study methods for parameter estimation. So, these are essentially methods to tackle high dimensional optimization problems. They could be multi-objective. Most cases we do not use a multi-objective optimization function. But in this lecture, I will introduce you to the methods for parameter estimation and convince you that gradient based methods and other methods, other standard methods are not entirely useful for parameter estimation for biological networks, and move over to direct search algorithms, which are the most commonly used family of algorithms for estimating parameters. So, let us now look at the methods for parameter estimation. So, there are many methods for parameter estimation and we are obviously more interested in the nonlinear optimization algorithms, right, because we have quite a nonlinear system. So, there are methods based on integrated and differential equations. There are methods that involve slope estimation. You want to typically constrain the parameter search space in your analysis, and there are also methods that involve gradient based that involve the gradient computations and so on. But if you see, most of these algorithms are not very applicable to biological data sets. See, okay, everything involves integrating of differential equations, but you really can't use and we will constrain parameter space, but basically gradient based algorithms are not very easily usable in biological data sets, because the it is very expensive to compute the gradient, right. So, at this point just step back and think of what do we mean by computing the gradient. What is it that you are going to compute the gradient for, and what does it entail? True. So, that is the gradient. What is the direction in which there is a maximum delta in your function? What is the function?
The cost function.
The cost function. So, remember, the cost function involves your, so the cost function we said was nonlinear, and to recap, let us call it some error E of theta, where theta is a vector. This is basically x measured comma I minus x predicted comma I of theta something of this sort, right. So, now how do you compute this prediction?
We have the model, right? Form of the model.
What is the form of the model?
The differential equation.
KMS.
So, it is going to be dx by dt is f of x comma t, or rather, is that right? So, this involves
Theta.
Theta, a parameter.
F of
yes,
theta.
but okay,
Parameter.
right. But look at the problem here. How do you now get, you want x of t. So, from this to get x of t, you need to integrate numerically.
So we kind of analytical expression for the.
Which is expensive. So, let us look at this. You do not have these time courses, right. What you actually have are some points.
So, I know the initial conditions.
Let us say you know the initial condition as well, right. But you need to basically integrate this.
And we
First
don't
of
know
all,
the theta difference when we integrate.
you know, so you will basically guess a theta and integrate. So for any given theta, you perform an integration and then you compute, you will compute the curve point, the prediction. Yeah.
So if theta is constant, like parameters are constant, like
Parameters, why do you say they are constant?
some value.
Okay.
In that case, you will integrate it once. So
Yes.
having theta same, after integrating you can just substitute thetas. You don't have to integrate it again and again, right? You will just integrate with having theta as some value.
No, because you're doing numerical, you have to actually do that. Because it's a good point. Which is why what you corrected me here is quite important. Right? I just said f of x comma t. It's actually f of x comma t comma theta. When you write the ODEs, you will be passing. It's not that you will have a function that has the integrated symbolic version of the ODEs where you can just plug in the thetas.
Just our numbers.
So you have to basically stick in this theta into the ODE function and then pass it to the integrator like ODE 23s or ODE 15s or something like that. So that doesn't happen. So that's what actually makes it more expensive. It's one of the things that makes it more expensive. Do you understand? Not convinced? So maybe we should look at the examples, right? That's where the but if you go back to what we discussed in the previous class, so we said there will be an and you will basically inside of this function you will run OD23s of at and x comma t in initial value and all that. So in fact theta will also become an additional input here.
Oh. But theta is just a value, right? It's not going to change with time or it's not going to change with anything.
But it's what the estimator keeps changing.
Okay.
So the parameter estimator will first take a guess of theta naught. It will compute E, right? It will check how good E is. Then it will go to theta 1, hopefully by gradient. But let's see, we were trying to see how difficult gradient is because you basically have to do delta E by delta theta.
So you have to explore all possibilities.
It's very difficult. So you can explore it, but you can imagine how expensive this is, right? So computing the cost function is expensive. It involves how many integrations? Many, yeah, it depends upon the number of states and so on, right? So it becomes very painful. So if you have 2-3 curves, you have to make 2-3 integrations in the first place, and it also depends upon the kind of data that you have, right? Your data might be something like, let me give you a different example. But you are familiar with this kind of data set, we have been looking at it since the previous class. One difference is if I say I did something here, let us say I added a drug. So then I have to stop the integration up till this point, change an initial condition and integrate again. So I have to essentially do multiple integrations to basically compute. I want to compute the predicted value at this point, predicted value at this point, predicted value at this point and this point. For just computing 4 points I might need 2 integrations and extend this to the number of species I have and so on. So it can rapidly become very, very expensive, right. So this is the practical side of things that you need to understand. So it is a difficult proposition, which is why you do not want to ever compute the gradient. If you can't compute the gradient, the next best option you have is guesswork, random search or better search, right, and this is what is captured under direct search algorithms, or many of these are also stochastic search algorithms. They are stochastic in that you do not search the same way each time. The order in which you explore the parameter space varies in each iteration.
Even the search algorithms you are going to integrate it many times, right?
Yeah. So every cost function evaluation requires many integrations.
Yes.
But so gradient you require several. To at each point if you have to compute the gradient, that will add to the cost, right? So that is why you don't go in for gradient. Was that your question or? So most real life cost functions like the ones we will use in biology are non-linear and non-differentiable, right? Well, you can numerically differentiate them, but so you cannot usually compute or use gradient information. So all the methods that don't use gradient information are broadly grouped under direct search methods. And a central aspect of all direct search methods is the same. You have a strategy to vary the parameters and a strategy to accept or reject a new parameter. Okay. The logic is very simple. You start with a theta naught, you compute a cost function, you then either use this cost function or whatever to compute another theta 1, and then is this good or not, right. So usually how it works is you start with theta naught, go to theta 1, from theta 1 you might either go back here or go to theta 2, from theta 2 you might either go back here or go to theta 3.
But doesn't this take more steps when compared to gradient based algorithms?
You still have so many function computations to perform, right?
Gradient at each step involves much higher computation.
You need to numerically differentiate.
Yeah, you will differentiate, you will just subtract it and you will go in the opposite direction to the gradient.
And then again you need to evaluate. So
Yeah.
you just have to keep evaluating and then random something.
But if you are taking a wrong step, again you will come back to your previous step, again you will evaluate. See, reaching the point, in gradient if it takes a step.
He's saying about converging.
So in practice I think these work quite well because the gradient computations can be quite expensive, right. So which direction do you compute gradient in?
So we will just compute the gradient of the function and we will take the direction opposite to the gradient of the function and we will move.
No, but along which, so you are an n-dimensional parameter space, right? How will you compute the gradient in that space?
It is possible. If I have
If you do grad, you will get a direct
I will get a gradient, but the convergence rate will be very high. It will not be that much converging. For a non-linear system, you cannot have gradient. You cannot rely on gradient.
No, see, how will you compute gradient? So you will compute x of some.
I have
say
theta parameter vector.
Y of x, y of theta plus delta theta minus y of theta by delta theta, right? What is delta theta? Which direction? In all directions? Or you have to go in every possible direction? That's where the problem comes.
You have to explore all possible directions and take the maximum.
And then how much to go? Which direction? How
What do you
much
mean just to grad?
It will give you one direction and then you go the opposite direction. No matter how many directions you
No, you have to numerically compute grad, right?
Yes.
See, this is how you numerically compute grad. So which means you have to figure out what is this delta theta?
That gives you the maximum change. If you got a nice expression,
But it may not guarantee optimality. That's what I'm saying. If you use
Anyway,
Newton.
nothing guarantees you optimality.
Yes, sir.
Even
No,
direct
but-
search also doesn't guarantee you optimality.
But if you use Gauss-Newton process, it will assume the system as quadratic locally. Then it will go to a single step to the center of that ellipse. But in this method, in gradient descent method, you don't have that. You cannot have that because it will assume the other thing. It will give you.
See, how do you numerically compute the gradient?
Anyway, you can get
we we choose random directions for delta.
Yes.
How many?
No, numerically computing, we can. Oh yeah.
Finally,
We have to
once they
again
get
explore
done,
all
then you have
possible
to choose
directions.
which direction to take.
That's where it fails, isn't it?
Hmm.
This won't get stuck at low ground. It could get stuck at. Since it's okay,
The
when it's a
probability,
regular
yeah,
sampling,
yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
Huh, but even there.
There is unlikely to get out of the local sometimes.
Yeah, also if you get stuck, you will not come out because everything will be higher than your cost. So you just don't take any
When
point.
in your access
But in direct search you have no such restriction, right? So that's only if you are
Just
greedy,
keep iterating
if you're doing like
through
hill
the
climbing or
parameters.
something. Let's get to that. Let's get to that in a moment. So how do these methods work? So the central aspect we said was there is a strategy to vary parameter vector and a strategy to accept or reject a new parameter vector. Once a variation is generated, how do you make the decision? You need to make a decision on should I go in this direction or should I go in the other direction, right? How do I come up with that decision? So one way is always accept a direction where I have reduced cost, right? That is what we normally call hill climbing, or actually hill descending, but it is usually called hill climbing. So always go in the direction which takes you towards the maximum. So that would be hill climbing. Right? So a new parameter is accepted if and only if it reduces, improves the value of the cost function. The greedy decision process converges fairly fast, but has the obvious risk of getting stuck in a local minimum or maximum. So let us look at maybe a slightly right. So this function has a clear local global minimum, right. This is the global minimum. But the problem is if you start with a hill climber, let us say you start here, hill climber or descender, let us use the terms interchangeably. You will go here, you will go here. Even here, if I were to zoom in, if you are at this point, you move in this direction, cost value increases. You move in this direction, cost value increases. So this is a local minimum and you are very likely to get stuck here, or you could come and get stuck here. You go in this direction, cost increases, you go in this direction, cost increases. So you are at a local minimum. But what you want to get here, how do you get here? So one thing to do is you have to somehow kick this out of local minima, right. So one obvious option is you can start exploring at different points. Maybe you start here, you immediately land here, right. But the problem is this is one dimension, this is one dimension, remember, right. I am just showing you the value of some x as theta changes. So the problem is in higher dimensions it can get really difficult. You will have many more, between every minima you will have a few maxima, between every few maxima you will have a few minima. It just really crazy landscapes can exist in higher dimensions. How do you handle it? It becomes very hard. And there are many techniques which are inherently parallel in searching, right, like genetic algorithms and evolutionary strategies. We will try to talk about them, and they have some built-in safeguards to avoid misconvergence. This is what we would call a misconvergence. You go to a wrong minimum, you wanted this but you got here, right. So how do you avoid these? So one way we suggested was you do lots of parallel search, but many of the algorithms have this parallel search built in, as we will see. And by running several vectors simultaneously, you can get superior estimations. Right? They can help escape the local minima. So, what are the desirable characteristics, right? You want the ability to handle non-differential, non-linear, multimodal cost functions, right. Cost functions are essentially very badly behaved as you would normally observe in biology, because the systems are highly non-linear. It should be parallelizable because you are going to be estimating the cost function too many times. So, you want the function to be parallelizable in some way, the algorithm. Ease of use, meaning you need few control variables to steer the minimization. What are these? These are what one would call as hyperparameters. They are parameters of your estimation algorithm. So, how do you, your estimation algorithm itself will have certain parameters. For example, in a hill climbing algorithm, your parameter will be how many random searches should I do, or how many initial places from which I should start, right. Although that is not the best example, you will see better examples for hyperparameters when we look at more complex algorithms. And these variables should be easy to choose. You do not want to spend a lot of time tuning your algorithm. You have to tune the algorithm by picking the right set of hyperparameters, right. And it should have good convergence properties and ideally consistent convergence to global maximum or global minimum across runs, right. So, only if I start at a particular x naught, that happens even for hill climbing, right. If I start at this x naught, hill climbing will happily converge to this minimum, whereas if I start at this x naught, it will just converge here, right. So, it is not reproducible, but obviously this is our wish list. So, it is not necessary that there is one algorithm that will satisfy everything in this wish list. So, again depending upon the scenario, depending upon the problem at hand, you may want to prioritize one or more of these features compared to the others. So, what are the features you would like to prioritize? So, there are some classic methods of direct search which involve Hook-Jeeves pattern search and your MATLAB FMIN search, which is called Neldermead simplex. So, this is direct search so much as it does not use gradient information, it is not stochastic. So, what it does is it tries to explore a particular direction. If the direction looks good, it will go faster in that direction. If the direction is bad, it will reflect to an opposite direction and so on. So, you should really try to look at the documentation of FMIN search, and you can run FMIN search with something like a verbose mode. It will tell you I did a contraction, I did a reflection, I did an expansion, those kinds of things. So, you will know exactly how the algorithm is proceeding and where is it getting stuck in the parameter space. So, in this lecture you had an introduction to the basic parameter estimation algorithms, and I also gave you the generic recipe for direct search algorithms, right. What are all the classic, so you want to have an initial x naught and how you go about finding the next point and whether or not you reject it and how do you terminate the optimization. In the next video we will start looking at some important direct search algorithms or stochastic search algorithms such as simulated annealing and genetic algorithms.